Welcome to Storytelling. This week's guest is a dynamic storyteller and mindset coach with a talent for helping people shift their perspectives. From New York City, he's an actor and singer who's taken his passion for performance beyond Broadway and into everyday life. Not only that, he's currently writing his own solo theatre show, blending his unique voice with his love for storytelling. He's a former sugar addict, a plant-based enthusiast, and let's just say his sharp wit and humour always keeps things interesting. Get ready for insights that are equal parts inspiring and entertaining. Please welcome Gregory Halpen. Hello, Gregory, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Debbie. How are you? It's so awesome to be here.
Gregory, what inspired you to choose solo theatre as your medium for storytelling?
Not always was that the case. I started out as an actor, musical theater artist, singer, all the training and performing and all of that. And it wasn't until over the past few years when I decided to explore solo theater. I always knew about it, something that I was very interested in learning more about. So that's more of a recent thing. I think it was meant to be. It's meant to be, I think, to create in this type of medium as a solo theater artist. Yeah, so it's a very interesting journey.
So tell us more about that journey, because you mentioned that your background was musical theatre, which meant that you probably performed in a company. And then you went from that experience to braving it on your own as a solo performer. So tell us more about that transition.
I experienced a lot of anxiety, like complex anxiety, and coming from a background of trauma. I felt that auditioning for roles, musical roles, acting roles, and all of that, I felt like I did it and I really worked hard at getting to a certain level in that. But the whole time I felt the struggle that I could not work through this anxiety, this fear, this performance anxiety. And then when I discovered solo theater, whether it's cabaret or writing my own solo play, I realized that, yes, I am there alone on the stage, which you would think like, wow, wouldn't that make the anxiety even worse? But my perception of that is I get to control all of it. It doesn't mean I need to stand up in a room and sing a song for somebody or recite a monologue just so I could be chosen for something and then be cast in a show. And then even though the process of developing a musical or a play is super fun, and the rehearsal process is really wonderful when you get to bond with your fellow castmates. But still, there was this part of it this anxiety part that was just super strong. So I'm discovering that as a solo theater artist, like I get to call the shots. I get to decide what I want to say. I get to tell my story. And I also get to choose who I want to be part of that story with me. Like, who do I want to direct me? Yeah. So it's a very interesting transition. People think like, oh my God, you're on stage by yourself. So doesn't that make it even worse? Doesn't that make it even more scary? But I'm like, yeah, it does. But there's a whole different energy to it when you're in control of it, when you're creating your own work, your own artwork.
And I think what you've said is really important, because a lot of people don't realize that when you are going for auditions, you are at the mercy of others to choose you. And you have the complete freedom when you're a solo performer on stage. How has the solo theatre format allowed you to create experiences that are both impactful and deeply fulfilling for your audience?
For a good part of a year and a half with this current show that I'm writing called Rainbow Baby. And that title it's new because I discovered something new about my past, about growing up. I feel that before that, I was lost on this path of not understanding what my story is going to be, what am I trying to say to the audience? And I did not realize how important the audience is to this journey. We're in relationship with each other. We are on this journey together. They are there to hopefully witness themselves through my story or through our story. And I decided to go into this past exploration around the trauma that I experienced growing up, surrounding the death of my 6-month-old sister, Jody, who I never got to meet. She was born 6 years before I was born. And so one night, my parents decided to go out and celebrate a friend's wedding. And they came home and she was gone. She was already dead, 6 months old, just unexpected. She wasn't sick or anything. So that to me, it forced me to look at my parents from a different perspective. It just made sense. Like, wow, that's why they raised me in so much fear and so much chaos and all, because of that, because they didn't have grief counseling. They didn't have any kind of healing work done. Just, it was 1965. So it wasn't really that prominent. What I'm trying to get at is, like, when you hit that special place where you're like, oh my God, this is why my life happened growing up, and this is why I am here where I am at this present moment, is because of one thing that happened. I mean, for different people, different things happen, but for me, that one experience, I believe, the death of my sister, I believe, is what launched me into the life that I am living now. It's because I was already born into trauma, the trauma that they reinforced over the 6 years before I was born. So once I tapped into that and realized that, I was like, oh my God, that's why. It makes so much more sense now. That's when my solo show made sense. That's when I'm like, oh, okay, that's what this is about. And rainbow baby happens to be a term when a child is born sometime after parents lose an infant child to death. And so I was born 6 years later. They considered me the rainbow baby because the rainbow baby provides this space of healing for the parents, regardless of whether or not it's short-lived or if it's long-term healing. So once I tapped into all of that, it just made me understand, like, what my message was, what my message is, what I'm trying to say to the story, and therefore translating that for the audience so they can go on this journey with me, instead of me being up on stage or in that show just spewing out information, trauma this, trauma that. Yes, I'm funny. Yes, this is funny. So if I did that, the audience would be very confused. They're oh, so what am I here for? Why did I buy this ticket? So with this newness, with this clarity, I opened up a door. I opened up this window for the audience to look in, to look through, and hopefully we'll be able to share universal truths where they can experience themselves rather than just me making it all about me, even though the show is about me.
I think it's a very special way to share your story. And what I really liked what you said just now, it wasn't just the journey, but you often make reference to we as an audience, we sharing the experience together. Tell us a bit more about that, about sharing that experience with the audience.
I have been in learning this new way of using I statements, especially with conflict, right? When you're in conflict with someone, you want to use an I statement just to keep it on yourself and not, point fingers or show or give blame to someone else. But with the show and with the audience, I say we is because we are in this together. Without the audience, I don't have a show. I just have words. I just have me standing on stage saying things. Without the audience's energy there, without their responses, without hearing them maybe cry in the audience or laugh at something or gasp at something, without that kind of feedback, then I'm just performing in a vacuum, performing in a vacuum. So I strongly lean into the sacredness of the performer and the audience being in a relationship with each other rather than just being these two separate entities.
And what would you say that you've learned most about yourself during these solo performances?
That I have a lot of healing to do still. And I think maybe it's a forever thing. I've learned that I have way more potential than I thought I did. I realized that I have more talent than I thought I had, and that I'm enough. I'm learning how to listen, even like in personal relationships. It's helping me to really listen to someone, to actively listen, rather than just, taking up space with mumbo jumbo.
You also do a lot of work with others to help them also. So, how do you help others harness the power of solo theatre to tell their own stories?
That's a good question, because I don't typically help people in terms of helping them put a show together. I approach it from the side of what's going on inside of them, inside of the solo performer who is stuck, who cannot get past these certain blocks. And a lot of times it has to do with not knowing their story, not knowing who they are as a performer, and not understanding how important the audience is with their journey, while they're on this journey, how important the audience is. And so I help them discover that. I help them discover how to create just unforgettable solo theater without all the self-sabotage. So we kind of, someone who's ready to dive in, dig in, and ready to work. That's what I like to do. That's the kind of solo artist I like to work with.
Now, let's go back to the theme of storytelling, because you said something very profound just now. You said that you try to harness others to actually know their own story so that they can share their own stories. How important is it? And how do people get to a place where they understand their story and can then share it with others?
It's a feeling, it's a knowing. It's a feeling that you get. It's not necessarily always about knowing the exact details of a story, but it's the feeling of this release, of this energy that does not feel tight anymore, that doesn't feel like the weight, like a really heavy weight on your shoulders. It can still feel heavy. It can still feel hard, tough, but it's a different kind. It's a kind that where, the shoulders are like finally relaxed and you can breathe. And that's how I like to describe knowing what it means to, because like telling your story through solo theater doesn't always mean you're going to tell your real, like your autobiographical story. You could do a solo theater show where you are, I don't know, take some famous person and somebody is like, oh, I really love this historical figure, so I'm going to write a show about them using their words, using their letters or whatever. So you have to become that character. At the same time, even though you're not telling your real personal story, your story's still going to filter in there somehow, just by who you are as an actor. Because when you are playing a character or a role, you have to find that humanity in that character. And the only way you're going to really reach that humanity is to know your own humanity and to know your own story. Or if it's autobiographical, then obviously, it's really important to know your story and to know why you're telling it.
So, Gregory, what tips would you provide to someone who's listening to this conversation and they're thinking, I want to share my story? And it doesn't have to be solo theatre, because there's lots of different ways that
Yeah.
others can share their stories. But what top tips would you give to someone who says, you know what? Because I believe that everyone's got a story that somebody else wants to or needs to hear. And it's about coming out of your shell in order to share that.
Yes. And as I was sharing earlier, I have Darth Vader is in front of me. So I'm looking at Darth Vader and I'm like, okay, so if I was going to just, I don't know, do a solo theater show about Darth Vader, I would really try to find his humanity. Anyway, I'm totally digressing, but the tips that I would, it's different for different people. for different solo artists, because there's cabaret performers. There are the Moth, as you know, the Moth type of storyteller, just standing up and telling a story without having it memorized or written down. Or there's the solo theater, the autobiographical solo playwriter kind of show. So there are definitely different types of solo performers. But I guess the first thing I would ask someone is like, why are you doing this? Like, why is this really important to you? Why do you want to tell this story? And that's where I would start. That's where I would start. Because if you don't know why, then you're going to struggle. And if it's not a bad thing to not know why at the beginning, sometimes we're not going to know what the message is or what the story we're trying to tell. That can come later. But if you're willing to ask yourself that question, just be willing and open to ask yourself that question, just to set the tone and just to set the, set the path for moving forward.
When can we expect to see your solo performance?
I would say probably within 6 to 8 months, I would say. It'll be like, I will present it online first as a reading, and then I'll do live readings in public, and then it'll develop into a real show.
Gregory, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your story and for being a guest on this podcast.
Thank you, Debbie. It was really nice to be on the show. Thank you. If you would like further details about Gregory, then please follow the links in the show notes.